God will give you wisdom and direction. How do you recognize God's message in the middle of so much information? Did you know there is a way to clearly discern what is truly from God in the middle of overwhelming information and constant noise? What is exhausting us right now is not a lack of information. It is the fact that, surrounded by so many voices, we no longer know how to discern God's true direction. When we cannot tell what is right, what is merely human opinion, and what God is actually saying to us in this hour, the heart grows more crowded and more restless. The mind keeps moving, but the inner life grows less clear. The more answers we try to collect, the more unsettled we become, and the more urgently we feel we must decide, the farther God's direction can seem. That is why people often stop seeking God's will and start reaching for whatever will calm their fear the fastest. This is where the real problem begins. More information does not automatically make a person wiser. If the heart is unstable, more information can make a person lose their way even faster. One voice sounds convincing, then another sounds convincing too. Everyone claims certainty. Everyone says their way is right, and instead of discerning, the heart begins reacting. A reactive heart does not search for truth. It usually grabs whatever voice makes its emotions feel safer. A fearful person clings to what justifies fear. An anxious person clings to what pushes them toward a quick decision. A tired person clings to whatever seems to promise relief. So what we need right now is not more noise, but the wisdom to discern what is truly from God. That is why this word matters so much. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. James 1:5. This promise is not for people who already know everything. It is for people whose minds are crowded, whose hearts are tired, and who desperately need God's direction. God does not begin by saying, "Try harder." He says, "Ask me for wisdom." So today we will not stay trapped in the noise. We will look together at how to discern God's message, how to recognize his direction, and how to receive his wisdom and peace in the middle of this time. Where does our urgency come from? And what is really shaping our decisions? Our urgency does not come from a lack of information. In many cases, it comes from having too much of it, while still being unable to discern what is true and what is from God. When every voice sounds convincing and every path presents itself as right, a person's inner center begins to shake. And once the center begins to shake, the heart no longer wants truth first. It wants relief first. That is where urgency begins. Urgency is not always a personality trait. Most of the time, it is the reaction of a heart that does not know how to remain steady in uncertainty. When nothing is clear yet, when the result has not come, when waiting feels long and heavy, most people do not find it easy to stay still before God. They just want something to hold on to. Even a wrong answer can feel easier than standing in uncertainty. That is why many people think they are making decisions based on what is right, when in reality they are often choosing what feels less frightening in the moment. A person under financial pressure is tempted to choose what seems to bring immediate relief. A person in a strained relationship is tempted to choose the words that end the discomfort fastest, not the words that are truest. A person who is afraid of the future is tempted to choose whatever makes uncertainty feel smaller, even if it is not the path God is leading. On the surface, it looks like decision-making, but underneath it, fear is often setting the direction. This is why more information does not always help. If the heart is unstable, a person will usually latch onto the voice that most strongly supports their emotion. Fear grabs what justifies fear. Urgency grabs what speeds things up. Woundedness grabs what protects itself, and that is how discernment starts to blur. So the real question is not, do I have enough information? The real question is, what is holding the center of my heart right now? If fear is holding it, fear will shape the choice. If God's peace is holding it, the heart will begin to seek His direction instead of immediate relief. This is the first truth we need to face today. Our urgent heart is not just a matter of temperament. It is often what happens when, in uncertainty, we are holding on to fear more tightly than we are holding on to God. So what we need is not just more facts, but the honesty to ask, what is really guiding my decision right now? Only then can we begin to separate human noise from God's direction. God gives the wisdom you need for today. So what we need right now is not more information and not a faster answer. We need the wisdom God gives for today. That is why James 1:5 is so important. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, and it will be given him. God does not begin by shaming our confusion. He begins by inviting us to ask. This means something powerful. God does not reserve wisdom for unusually strong people. He gives it to those who know they need Him. The problem is not that we do not already have all the answers. The problem is that in our confusion, we often stop asking God and start trying to build an answer out of fear, pressure, and other people's voices. That is when the heart grows even more crowded, and the wisdom God gives is often different from what we expect. We want the full map. We want to know the entire outcome, the safest route, the final answer, and the whole future at once. But God often gives wisdom in a daily way. He gives what we need for this step, this choice, this hour. Because God is not only a giver of answers, He is the one who teaches us daily dependence. That is why His wisdom often functions more like light for the next step than a spotlight on the whole road. It helps you know what not to hold on to. It helps you know what not to rush. It helps you know what must wait, what must be surrendered, and what must be obeyed right now. God's wisdom is not vague. It is practical. It does not always tell you everything at once, but it begins to make the next faithful step clear. This is a great comfort. You do not need to have every answer today. God is not requiring full certainty before you move. He is giving daily wisdom so you can walk faithfully today. So instead of trying to solve tomorrow's fear all at once, ask for today's wisdom. That wisdom becomes today's direction, today's stability, and the beginning of today's peace. God's message becomes clearer to the person who truly asks Him. The reason many people miss God's message in the middle of so much information is not mainly that they lack access. It is that before they truly ask God, they have already attached themselves to the answer they want. A person can say they are seeking God's will while actually wanting something else more deeply. A quick end to fear, a fast resolution, a path that feels immediately safer. So the mouth prays, but the heart is already leaning in one direction. And once that happens, the person is no longer listening openly, they are selecting. This is where discernment rises or falls. Wisdom does not begin with knowing a lot. It begins with the honesty to admit, my heart may not be seeing clearly right now. That is why James 1:5 matters so much. Scripture does not shame the person who lacks wisdom. It tells that person to ask God. God is not waiting for perfect people to become clear. He gives wisdom to those who know they need it. This is where humility matters. Humility is not weakness. It is the willingness to admit that my fear, my urgency, my wounds, and my preferences may be clouding my view of God's direction. Without that honesty, a person will keep treating their own emotion like revelation. In relationships, they will confuse self-protection with wisdom. Under financial pressure, they will confuse immediate relief with God's leading. In fear about the future, they will confuse quick closure with peace. But these things are not the same. So the real question becomes this: do I actually want God's message, or do I just want my own anxious preference confirmed? If that question is never faced, a person will keep reaching for the voices that support what they already feel. But the person who truly asks God begins to do something different. They make room for God's truth to lead more than their fear. They let God's wisdom correct them, slow them, and redirect them. That is when discernment begins to sharpen. So remember this: God's wisdom does not come to the person who already knows everything. It comes to the person who truly asks Him. And the one who truly asks is the one who no longer wants fear to sit on the throne of the heart. That is why God's message becomes clearer there. If you do not slow down, God's direction becomes harder to discern. The person who truly asks God does not immediately rush ahead. They know that when urgency takes control, fear becomes louder than wisdom. An urgent heart does not discern well. It reacts. Instead of asking what is right, it grabs what feels immediately safer. Urgency can look like decisiveness, but often it is fear behind the wheel. That is why slowing down matters. God's wisdom is usually clearer in a heart that can pause than in a heart being pushed by panic. Biblical stillness is not passivity. It is the refusal to let emotion make the final decision. It is the choice to stop long enough for God's truth to become clearer than your fear. This is intensely practical. In a strained relationship, urgency wants to send the quickest message and end the discomfort. Under financial pressure, urgency wants the fastest solution, not necessarily the right one. In uncertainty about the future, urgency wants closure more than truth. But a fast answer is not always a wise answer. Many rushed decisions are not the fruit of discernment. They are the fruit of pressure. Isaiah 30:15 gives us a needed standard. In returning and rest you shall be saved. In quietness and in trust shall be your strength. God's direction becomes clearer in trust, not in panic. When you slow down before God, you begin to see more than the immediate threat. You begin to see what is true, what must wait, what must be surrendered, and what path carries God's peace instead of your fear. So slowing down is not wasting time. It is refusing to be led by the wrong master. Without that pause, a person will almost always follow the voice that matches their emotion. With that pause, the line between human noise and God's direction becomes clearer. That is why the wise person is not the one who moves fastest. It is the one who can stop before God. God's direction usually begins showing up in small choices before it appears in major decisions. Many people look for God's will only when they are facing a major decision. They want clarity about the future, the next door, the next season, the next big move. But in real life, God's direction usually begins appearing much earlier than that. It begins in the small choices of the present. The reason is simple. Major decisions do not happen in isolation. They are made by a heart that has already been shaped by a pattern. A person who has been reacting to small pressure with urgency will likely do the same when the big moment comes. A person who has been giving small fears too much authority will likely do the same when the larger crossroads arrive. But the person who has been bringing ordinary moments under God's leadership is more prepared to stand rightly in bigger ones. This is why small choices matter so much. Will I answer in anger, or will I pause? Will I believe the first voice that sounds convincing, or will I test it? Will I choose what is convenient, or what is honest? Will I let fear set the tone of this day, or will I surrender that fear before God? These moments seem small, but they reveal what is actually leading the heart. Scripture never treats ordinary faithfulness as insignificant. God cares how we speak, how we respond, how we handle pressure, and how we act when no one is watching. A person may say they want God's direction for the future while ignoring the small acts of obedience in the present. But God's direction is not usually given to satisfy curiosity. It is given to form a life. He does not only reveal the road ahead, He trains the heart that will walk it. So discernment does not begin far away. It begins here, in how you speak today, in what you resist today, in what you refuse to compromise today, in whether you allow fear or truth to shape your next response. That is why God's direction becomes clearer through small faithfulness before it becomes clear in major decisions. The person who honors God in the small is already learning His voice. 6. When God's wisdom enters, peace begins to follow. When a person begins to discern God's message, the first thing that changes is not always the outward situation. It is the inner order of the heart. The problems may not all be gone. The unanswered questions may still remain. But the heart is no longer being pulled in every direction by fear, urgency, and competing voices. This matters because peace in Scripture usually begins there. Many people think peace can only come after everything is fixed, but often God's peace comes first. Not because every problem has disappeared, but because God's wisdom has begun to put the center back in order. Once you begin to see what to hold, what to release, what to wait on, and what not to follow, the heart starts breathing again. That is the beginning of peace. This peace is not just a calmer feeling, it is the stability that comes when the heart becomes more anchored in God's direction than in the noise around it. Before, the loudest voice might have been fear. Before, urgency might have been controlling the pace. Before, other people's opinions might have been pulling the heart apart. But when God's wisdom enters, the standard changes. The heart begins caring more about what is true before God than about what feels easiest right now. That is why peace follows wisdom. And this peace is especially precious because some situations do not resolve quickly. Some relationships heal slowly. Some pressures remain for a while. Some answers unfold step by step. But even before everything changes, God can begin to steady the center. He often gives peace before He gives the full picture. He stabilizes the heart before He resolves every detail. That peace is not weakness. It is evidence that God's direction is taking root. So hold on to this. When God's wisdom enters, the heart no longer belongs to the loudest voice in the room. It begins to belong again to the God who leads with truth. And from there, peace begins to rise. God will give you wisdom and direction. This is the core message of today. What you need most in the middle of overwhelming information is not another voice. It is God's message, and God's message does not leave you more scattered. It gives wisdom, it gives direction, it gives peace. God is not leaving you in confusion. If you are tired from too many voices, if you are overwhelmed by uncertainty, if you are afraid of choosing wrong, God is not standing far away from you. He still gives wisdom. He still gives direction. He still gives peace. The deepest issue is not whether you can solve everything today. The deepest issue is whose leading you are living under. If you live under the rule of fear, you will grow more urgent. If you live under the voices of people alone, you will grow more divided. But if you live under the wisdom of God, your heart will begin to come back into place. That is why God's direction is not only about the future, it is about what reorders your heart today. And if everything is not resolved yet, that does not mean you have failed. Slow answers are not proof that God is absent. Sometimes the victory of a day is simply this: you did not let urgency become your shepherd, and you did not let the loudest voice replace God's voice. Sometimes faith looks like asking again, listening again, and choosing God's wisdom again. That is not small. So remember the central truth of today. What will save you in the middle of too much information is not more answers. It is the wisdom and direction God gives today. When the noise rises again, come back to that truth. God gives wisdom. God gives direction. God gives peace. Remember today's message. First, it is not information itself that saves us. It is God's message that sets us straight. What is exhausting us is not simply the amount of information around us, but our inability to discern God's true direction inside all that noise. That is why what we need is not more voices, but the wisdom God gives. Second, God's wisdom comes to the heart that asks Him, not to the heart that is ruled by panic. If fear becomes the standard, a person will chase quick relief. If God becomes the standard, a person will pursue true direction. So the real issue is not how quickly you can get an answer. It is whose leading your heart is under. Third, when God's wisdom enters, direction and peace begin to come together. Not every problem ends in a moment. But the person who receives God's message is no longer pulled in every direction by every voice. That person begins to recognize the next faithful step and walk it with God. Remember this one sentence: what will save me in the middle of too much information is not more answers, but the wisdom and direction God gives today. It is not more information, but the wisdom God gives that keeps you. It is not the loudest voice, but the direction God gives that sets you straight. And in that wisdom and direction, God is still holding your heart in peace today.